Welcome to our second episode of On the Front Row. And today we have a lovely guest with us, Soumya. Soumya is the founder and CEO of Luxury Facts. And today we're going to be discussing quite an interesting, sometimes controversial topic, and that is the art of appropriation versus appreciation. And before we go into the topic, it's going to be an exciting one where we cover how luxury brands often get their hands red in stealing other cultures and not giving it full credit. But before we go into the full topic, we would love to meet Soumya and know about her. Welcome to our discussion today, Soumya. It's so lovely to have you with us.
Hi, Fola. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So good to see you, and happy Friday.
Happy Friday. I know. Perfect. It's a perfect day for, having a nice fireside chat on such a topic.
It's quite chilly in here, but I'll take the fireside effect. All right. Let's dive into it. So you built Luxury Facts into such a respected platform. And so for people that don't know what you do, how would you describe it and what you do in one sentence or more than one sentence?
Well, technically, we are a digital magazine. Luxury Facts is a digital magazine. And if I have to describe it in one line, I would say we want to inform, educate, and truly decode the very tantalizing world of luxury for our readers.
That's a good one. And what inspired you to start the magazine?
Uh, so I started the magazine when I was in India, and at that time there were a lot of these luxury brands coming to the country. They were opening up their first stores. They were trying to inform customers about themselves. There's never been any dearth of money in India, so to speak. Um, so yeah, it was an exciting time when India's first luxury mall was opening up in Delhi, in Bombay. So yeah, at that time I was already working in print luxury magazines, and I thought that luxury could be talked about in better ways, rather than just from a celebrity point of view of who wore what. I think there was more potential to talk about it in detail, and that's when I started Luxury Facts.
Oh, and it's been great so far. And what, just to wrap up on your background, what has been your highlight in terms of running the magazine?
I think my highlight is like every day is a highlight, I would say, when you hear about what brands are saying, you see what they are doing, you learn from what they are doing. Every day is exciting because it sort of correlates to the topic that we are going to talk about today. Brands do take inspiration from a lot of different cultures and countries and communities around the world. And because of that, I get to learn about a lot of these other countries and communities and cultures. So, it every day is so knowledgeable. Every day I'm learning something new. Every day my mind is churning out a new debate. That makes every day a highlight. And that's why I love what I'm doing.
Love it for you. Love it for you. So let's get right into it. Appropriation versus appreciation. It's something that's been happening over and over in the fashion industry. Every other year, we hear another headline where another brand has lifted a design from a culture and hasn't properly credited it or has just, passed it up as their own design. Why do you think this comes up a lot in the fashion industry?
Uh, there are multiple reasons, I will say. First of all, fashion or luxury fashion, it's let me pertain it to luxury fashion only. It's at the crossroad of, I will say, creativity, commercialism, and culture.
Hmm.
So obviously it's a very creative field. Obviously they have to make money. And obviously luxury brands are seen as a culture building blocks also, or they're seen as taste makers in the community. So, they sit at this crossroad where three different industries are meeting. And that's why it's a very visible industry. It's a very visible industry. Secondly, the visibility in the past decade or so, I will say, has been highlighted because of the whole digital influx. All your ramp shows are digital. Your social media is, it's like sitting and watching. I mean, before these ramp shows were behind closed doors, where a very tight-knit community of people only came and viewed those. Now it's everywhere. Now everybody can comment on it. Everybody can see it, whether they can buy it or not. Everybody can see it. So it's highly, highly visible. Secondly, I will say that, fashion thrives on inspiration. Uh, it's very rare that you're coming out with something completely new. You have to be inspired by something, whether it's a bee or a leaf or another culture or a community. So you have to be inspired. So when you're transpiring with so many ideas, and you are borrowing from so many cultures, it is bound to be visible and it is bound to be discussed. Another thing that I will say is, this debate comes too much in luxury fashion because of the whole power balance. So these are mostly Western brands, European or American brands, that are usually borrowing from communities or countries that were historically oppressed, or they were historically marginalized, or, exoticized for no rhyme or reason, or maybe for a reason, but yes, they were historically oppressed. So when they borrow from a culture and do appropriate it and benefit from it, then it becomes a larger global discussion. It becomes a larger economic discussion. It's just not a creative discussion anymore. It becomes an economic discussion. So, I think that it's because of all these factors that it becomes such a big debate in the fashion industry.
Yeah. And I think you referenced the very title of the episode in terms of nothing being original. And fun fact, we got the title of this session by Austin Kleon. I don't know if anybody has read the book. It's Still Like an Artist, which just references the point that nothing is ever truly original. So back to the point that you were saying, and we see that in fashion. So things come back again in cycles, things come back again,
Right.
in trends. But then when it comes to appropriation, it's a different conversation because some designs, some aspects, or some aesthetics are relevant to a particular culture. Some fabrics, some materials are relevant to a particular culture. And so when we take, for example, the most recent one with Prada and I'm not going to pronounce it very well, but the Kolhapuri sandals.
Yes.
Okay, Kolhapuri sandals. Got it. Where do you think the process broke down? So if things could happen again, right? If the designer did look at the sandals and say, "Oh, I like this motif. I like the weaving style of this." What should the process look like, and what should respectful homage look like?
Okay, like I think I will start this question by saying that, I think I've spoken about this before as well. There's a very thin line between inspiration and copying. Like you spoke about, nothing is ever truly original, right? Which is, I will say, which is partly true in fashion. Uh, but even then, there's a very thin line between inspiration and copying. When you are inspired, you talk about it. But
Hmm.
when you're copying silently.
Hmm.
So when the whole Prada Kolhapuri thing happened, or the countless other examples that have happened before it, that is what happened. They took something and they just silently adopted it without talking about it. That's where the process broke out. What they could have done instead was, you saw something, you liked something, you get into its history, you see why it was made, you see what is the story behind it, and you put that story in your product. I mean, luxury is all about storytelling. That is the difference between a fast fashion and a luxury fashion brand. It's not just about the product. I mean, obviously the product is very highly crafted, no denying that. But another major difference is the narrative that you create around it. So when Prada took that Kolhapuri chappal and stripped it of its meaning or its history or its story, that is when the process broke out. So, what they could have done instead was spoken to the community that makes Kolhapuri chappals. Like there is a very specific community in Maharashtra that makes it. And they don't even charge so much. Like the Prada Kolhapuri chappals, I think, are like $700 or something. So, and if you go and buy it from India, these are like highly crafted sandals, which are made of leather, which are dyed in vegetable dye, and they are hand braided, and they make patterns on the leather. It's a painstaking process, but they don't charge something like that. They probably charge like around $40 or something for one sandal. What they could have done instead was talking to the community, involve them in the design process. They could have given it a Prada effect in the sense, they could have made it in multiple colors or put their logo or, give it their own boost in some way to show that it's a Prada product. But at the same time, involving them, cueing them on the design, taking design inputs from them, letting them make it. Let them make it and get it to the ramp and say that this is made in India or this is made by the actual community that makes Kolhapuris with a Prada embossing on it or, whatever, their own signature on it. And then go on to say that we are doing this in profit sharing. that would actually mean that you're inspired and you're appreciating a culture or a community rather than appropriating. Yeah.
You talked about profit sharing, which is something that I'm going to touch back on because we're going to talk about what model is sustainable going forward. But in terms of, I mean, I love the example and how you broke down what good should have looked like. Is there any other brand that you can think of in recent times that have done this very well in terms of good collaborations with, an artisanal community or a designer who has legitimate roots and rights to a particular design?
I think Dior does it very well. Dior did it very well with the Chanakya school. They don't just use them for their embroideries and for their scene designs. They have all these big artworks that they put on their sets when they're having ram shows, and they
Yeah.
also do embroidery for their work. So they are not just using them and paying money, but they're crediting them. They're involving them in the process. They're putting that story out, which makes it a beautiful story for the consumer as well. Like any consumer would want to buy Dior because of the different connections it has, it's the sensibility it has, the appreciation it has for different cultures, and of course the beauty that Chanakya adds through its embroidery, of course. So I feel Dior did it very well, not just by crediting them, but by putting them at the front and center of their story. It's not just a passing reference. They do some sort of profit sharing also, and they have worked on multiple projects. Not just the Ram shows, but they also did something at the Vatican, I believe, recently,
Yeah.
where Dior and Chanakya collaborated for with this beautiful art show, which is actually exhibited at the Vatican right now. So, all these things matter. I think that's a beautiful example of, how you can do it well in collaboration with the community.
Very good example. And I think also in recent times, another good example that we can reference is Ralph Lauren's collaboration with a designer of Native American origin. I think her name is Naomi Glasses, and it was well credited. I mean, she had a studio, and it was Ralph Lauren in collaboration with the studio where the artist is in the forefront, the designer is in the forefront. She gets to talk about her inspiration, talk about the design. So there's a bit of ownership, part ownership, in the creative journey, and I think that's just a very good example of what cultural appreciation and collaboration can look like. Good. And one more. So I know we said we're talking about luxury, but I think there is a wider play and a group of players who just get away with a lot of things, and that's fast fashion. But not just fast fashion players, because fast fashion players, typically when we talk about the mainstream ones, they will take inspiration from what's coming from the runway. But we're talking about players like the ultra fast fashion like Shein and Tim. Literally, regardless of where you are in the world, just copy your images. If they're being kind, they take up the head of the models and they just use the body images with the clothes, no need for editing, and they just copy paste and remake everything. Why do you think? But nobody seems to kind of like give them the same level of backlash that we give the luxury brands. Why do you think this is?
That's a that's a very good observation. Um, I think there are again multiple reasons for that. Uh, First of all, fast fashion or ultra fast fashion like Shein or Temu and all, or even for that matter, Zara, or not that they're appropriating, but I'm just talking in general about fast fashion brands. They have a very fast cycle. They put up like thousands of designs every day. So even if they're appropriating, by the time anybody sees it and processes it, it's already gone. So it's the cycle is so fast that it doesn't come in the public knowledge so harshly so much. Secondly, then it boils down to the money. Like if
Hmm.
I'm buying those Kolhapuri chappals from Prada for $700, it hurts me because first of all it's so expensive, plus it's appropriated from a cultural community in my country, and I'll be like, dude, this is not fair. But if I'm buying the same thing from Shein or Temu for like $15, I'll be like, wow, that's great, that's fine, I'm getting it for $15. Yeah, it's a copy, but great, it's $15. you know I don't expect Shein or Temu to they're not benefiting, they're not profiteering from that design so much as luxury brands. So I'm happy to pay that $15.
I will argue because those guys, even though they're low on prices, but then they're high on volumes. And so they may not be making the same margins, but they are raking in. And I did before the episode, I did a quick check just to see Ankara outfits. And literally for me, I think what really just boils my blood is the fact that these are designs and models and images from, local designers, well-known designers, and they really just take it and put it on there. So yeah, but I get the point. It's kind of in the whole scheme of things, it's more low stake
It's more
because
low.
the expectations from these companies are actually already low. So they get a pass because they're a lot more low stakes than the luxury
Exactly.
brands, like
People
when
don't
it comes to
expect,
pricing power.
yeah, people don't expect anything from these brands. People just expect low-priced items which will last them for 2 months or 3 months and then, done with it. So I don't think the expectations are there. Plus, I feel from all these ultra fast fashion brands, I think they have bigger issues to that challenge them. They're all the claims on environment and labor issues and all of that stuff. I think they have bigger issues to fight. So when it comes to appropriation, I don't think they care or the customer cares. Uh, and I think secondly, like I think it goes back to my earlier point. Luxury brands are seen as taste makers. They are seen as something that create culture, that reference culture. They're seen as broader conversation makers. I don't think Sheen or Temu, even attempt to be in that circle. So again, like I said, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. For all you know, these guys are making the Kolhapuri chappal in Kolhapur where it is supposed to be made and just selling it for a cheap price. We don't know how what their supply cycle and all that logistical cycle is like. So I don't know. But again, we don't have expectations from them. We do have expectations from luxury brands. And I think that's where they just managed to get away from this whole debate.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the point that resonated the most was the fact that luxury brands in some cases do shape culture. And so if that is very repetitive, then I think it's more problematic versus where you have like the smaller players that just replicate designs for profit and speed. Good. And yeah, so you touched briefly on profit sharing, but I wanted to explore that. What do you think a more sustainable economic model would look like in terms of, for luxury brands going forward? Because what we're saying is that we're not saying that we are anti um, cultural appreciation. We want to see some cultures go mainstream. We want to see some designs, some regions be well celebrated on a global stage. But then what do you think from an economic perspective and commercial perspective is a sustainable way to go forward, either by profit sharing or licensing or partnering with the artisanal houses? What's the way forward for this?
Um, I definitely do think if you are appreciating a culture, if you're taking inspiration from a culture, then there should be some element of profit sharing in it, especially when you know that that said community is probably selling the same product for a much, 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 much lower price than you plan to sell it for. So I feel profit sharing will not only it's a way of investing back in that community. So like if I have to work in term economically speaking, if I have to work with a community like this, I think first of all, like I mentioned before, they should be involved in the design. They should be a part of the design process, what goes into that product, what does not go into the product, the right way to put the color or the design, along with the brand's own signatures and codes, that should be a part of it. Secondly, when it comes to profit sharing, there it has to be very transparent. I feel it has to be very transparent. Whatever pricing you're putting out, how much you're giving to that said community, that should be very transparent. I also feel that this should not be like if you're actually taking inspiration and if you're actually respecting a community, this should not be just a one-off capsule. Then that means you're just taking out a product for the hype of it or whatever. I feel it should be a more long-term collaboration, like again Dior did with Chanakya, and I think the way Ralph Lauren does it with Naomi Glass. This should not be a one-off this thing. So it has to be beyond profit sharing in the sense where you're sharing the cost or the profits of the product itself, but also reinvest back into that community. you know and there are different ways you could do it. You could do it by building a school or you don't want to build a school, fine, but there has to be a more long-term collaboration, economically speaking, so that you're not just benefiting the community, you are building that conversation, building that product into a more long-term conversation globally. Because you have the platform, luxury brands have that global platform. These artisans don't. These artisans come from small villages. So, what can be more beautiful than to uplift them, than to bring their story onto a stage?
Hmm.
So, I feel it has to be, in terms of profit sharing, in terms of the storytelling, I feel it has to be a more long-term project rather than just one-off capsule.
Hmm. Hmm. You mentioned something, and my brain is gonna is going in one direction of asking quite a provocative question. Do you think the reason why the main reason why these brands aren't investing in the PR and storytelling in collaborating with these artisanal houses is still because it doesn't fit a luxury narrative? So we talked about, the sandal factories. It's not going to be fancy. If they are making shoes, it's not pretty. If
Right.
I go to, I mean, I'm Nigerian, and if I go to West Africa and look at some of our local artisanal fabrics in terms of the ashoke or adire, they're not fancy. They are dye pits.
Yes.
You know, do you think that's part of the reason why they want the end product and the aesthetics, but then the storytelling sometimes is so hard? I don't want to use not the word whitewash, but then to it's hard to put a glossy paint over it and tell such a fancy story. And do you think that's the reason why they are reluctant to invest in that storytelling and partnership?
It could be a reason. I will not deny that. There is no nice clause to it. I completely agree. But I feel there can be a better way to do it. And again, another reason to help uplift that community, to help gloss that community. So
Hmm.
like again, the sandal factory that we are talking about for Prada, they don't have money right now to make it fancy. They have not
Yeah.
branded the sandal. They don't have
Yeah.
that kind of money. But with a brand like Prada's support, it could eventually become like that in the
Mm.
long.
We're saying there is a way for you to collaborate with these local artisanal houses, but then you should be prepared to invest in the storytelling, the history, the background of the culture or the design that you're lifting and show through partnership. So I am for cultural appreciation, but
Yeah.
it has to be done the right way.
It
So
has to be done
going
the
to
right way. And I think it has to be done the right way. And I think at the minimum, give credit, give the
give
story,
credit,
give credit. Like, okay,
give
fine, you
credit
can't.
and give the story. Yeah.
Yeah, because like for example, I think there's this whole Gucci turban thing that happened. They took that turban from the Sikh religion, and for Sikhs in India, it is a very religious and cultural symbol. So when you lift that up and you don't explain the context behind it, or you don't explain the story behind it, and then afterwards you don't even apologize about it, which was, a double whammy. So, then that's hurtful. The least they could have done was, say the story behind it, and it could have been a great narrative. So I feel, at the least, do that. Acknowledge and respect. That's the bare minimum. Profit sharing, yes, that's a larger economical debate. It'll be wonderful to have that. And I feel like if you don't want to show the sandal factory in your videos, in your communication, don't. But at least talk about it.
About it. Do you think
Yeah,
there are some designs that should be off limit? Things that have religious values, like you mentioned the turban, which is more of a religious than a cultural thing. Do you think there's some things that should be off limit, even in appreciation?
I do think it should, it could be off limit, or if you really want to do it, take permission from the community. Take permission. Although I'm sure that's also a very difficult thing to do. Like if you have to go to the sick people to take permission for the turban, who do you
What
go
would
to?
that look like? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that's very difficult. So I will say that, tread very carefully. If you can do it the right way, like you said, if you can acknowledge and credit in the right way, do it. If you think, because like I said, there is a lot of public scrutiny now, thanks to the whole
Mm.
digital
Yeah.
world that we are in. Um, Stay away. If you
Stay
don't know how,
away. Yeah, just stay safe and stay away. There's a lot to go on. And
Mm,
I'm thinking about it. I think while you were thinking about it, I think my response would be there are some elements that should be off limits,
yes,
regardless of how beautiful the design may be. So things that are related to a negative part of history or trauma part of history for a
right.
culture. So I'm just spitballing here and I'm just making this up. So for example, cowrie shells in Western Africa were an emblem of currency at that point in time, which also then became a feature of, designer for hair braiding or even embroidering clothes. I
Okay.
would say items like that, if, for example, that is linked to the slave trade across the Atlantic, or it was a bargain of exchange at some point, that just stay away from it.
Okay.
Anything that potentially has like religious contention or cultural contention where the roots and origin is, is nefarious at the least, or it has a negative connotation, just stay away from it. I mean,
Mm.
appreciation is a thing, such a thin line between both.
Yes,
So I think, the brands have to thread very carefully.
true.
Yeah.
Yes.
But on a more positive note, is there any, just taking from your culture, is there any part, any design, any outfit, any style that you think you would love to see go mainstream?
I think there's one design that has already gone pretty mainstream, and like it's so mainstream now, like because I remember when it started, it was talked about as being a very Indian thing, but now it's not even like, it's so mainstream that you don't even need to say it anymore, is the high collar jackets that men have over
Yeah.
here. So they were called the Nawab jackets before, or the Nehru collar jacket, because it was our first prime minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who had this very typical style of wearing high collar jackets. And so that collar became known as the Nehru collar. And later on, a lot of luxury brands started adopting it, and they called it the Nawab jacket. They called it that it was inspired by the
Mhm.
Indian sartorial fashion. And now it is so mainstream that all your luxury brands do it for menswear. And they
Yeah.
don't need to say it anymore that it's an Indian thing. Now everybody
Mhm.
knows it's an Indian thing already.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, yeah, I think that's a great example of how they did it properly, sensitively, with the proper accreditation, with the proper story. And yeah, it worked. It
Yeah.
worked beautifully for all those brands.
Yeah. I think another example is a Mandarin collar. Actually, even us calling it Mandarin collar means it's from Chinese origin. So yeah, that's also a very good example of going mainstream but still bearing the title of where it comes from.
Right.
If I could think from my side, I think it's a particular fabric. It's Ashoke. I'm Yoruba, and I'm from western part of Nigeria, and it's just very finely woven cotton fabric. It's very most of the time it's handmade, but I think there's a bit more technology that can make it in faster production. But it's such a beautiful fabric. You can have different weaves, different motifs behind it. I would love to see it go mainstream, but I would also love the Nigerian designers to profit from it first,
Yeah.
um, before it goes mainstream, and let it be credited. Don't write it in the description, woven. No, it should be say Ashoke this item, and
Yeah.
just calling it what it is. I won't mind if I go on a Prada website or a I don't want to say I don't think I don't want to say it on Gucci. Just let me see. Let me think of a designer that I think would be a very good fit, even Hermes, right? And you have a title there, you have Ashoke, and you put a note, this fabric is inspired or originates from Western Africa, and you put a storyline and you put a
Right.
price point there. It celebrates a culture because it can also drive inbound demand. So people see it, they see it on the design, they see it on the runway, they see it on the global stage. They do a bit more research because of the storytelling that the brand's investing, and then it drives inbound demand, you know, to the local artisanal houses, then it's a win-win for everyone. So for example, if Prada had done the sandals very well, and there was storytelling behind it, there was cultural referencing behind it, it will be beneficial to the artisanal designers that are making the sandals. And so it can be a win-win, but I think it's just where there's just carelessness, and lack of investment in proper storytelling that things get very messy, and we have this half-baked apologies that we're getting every other summer, every other fashion season.
True.
Yeah, great. All right, we are almost wrapping up. Our discussion has just been it's a very particular topic. So I mean, there's so many ways to cut the pie. But going back to you now, if you weren't writing about luxury, what career would you secretly try?
Something to do with interior design. Something
Yeah.
to do with interiors or something. I mean, I love to have beautiful things around me. So, I think I would have translated that into a career probably. Yes. that would have been my alternate career.
You, the lovely painting behind you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so design things still related to design and creativity. Oh, great.
Thank you.
And what was your first ever luxury purchase and your most recent luxury purchase?
First ever. It was a Burberry trench coat, and I think that was like about 12 years back, 12, 13 years back. So I went, so yeah, it was a Burberry trench coat and a Burberry t-shirt for my dad at that time.
Oh, sweet.
And funnily, my dad still wears that Burberry t-shirt. He says it's still the same 12 years later. He loves it. He still wears it. So I guess that says something about their quality.
Good for you,
Um,
Barbie.
yeah, although I will say I have outgrown my trench coat, so the poor thing went away. But yeah, my dad still wears his Burberry t-shirt. And my most recent purchase was these Paul Smith cufflinks that I got for my husband. That was
Oh,
my most
sweet.
recent. Yeah.
Sweet. So, I mean, it's been such a great discussion with you, Soumya. I've enjoyed the topic. I'm
Seriously.
sure we haven't done it
So,
justice enough because there's a lot more to cover. But so far, I think it's just a good time to just put a pin on it. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Soumya.
no, I think it was a great discussion. And again, like you said, there's so much behind this. But I think this is a topic where everybody has an opinion. So I hope this episode does do well. And I hope I said the right things. I don't know what I said, but I said some things and I hope they resonate well with the audience. But yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on today's episode. It's On the Front Row with Soumya. And join us again for the next episode. We'll let you know when that comes up. Cheers. Bye.